My name is Greg Ford, and this is my Internet Protocol presentation over TELNET. Here's my introduction. TELNET originally comes from the term teletype network, which was its original name, which was also shortened from the name teletype over network protocol. It was originally one of the first Internet standards. It allows a user to access a remote terminal by using text-oriented communication. It was created in 1969 and finalized in 1983, which is shortly after the TCP protocol was finalized. Although that 1969 date sounds kind of weird, early versions of the Internet were created in the early 1960s as a military technology, so that date's not quite as weird. One of the early versions of the Internet was created by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, and was known as ARPANET. So, again, 1969 isn't that odd, but older than I thought. Uses. The primary use today is remotely configuring a terminal without having to move to another location. May also be known as a terminal emulation program. It is used as a standard for accessing routers and switches. One of the biggest examples of this is something such as PuTTY. It allows for a full exchange of data, meaning that it can send commands as well as receive data from the remote terminal. The benefits of TELNET, the biggest one is that it connects to other terminals via the TCP/IP network, which reduces the need for moving from one location to another for most configuration settings. And again, the fact that it can be used over the TCP/IP network is probably the biggest advantage it has. Because the vast majority of other devices use TCP/IP, this means these devices may be remote accessible if needed. This, of course, leads to security issues, so that's definitely a concern. It can also be used for remote troubleshooting. A lot of companies will have their IT teams use TELNET to not really securely, but to remotely access devices on-site or even off-site within the network. This allows companies to control costs and time while looking into issues with the device. Less time moving to the location of the issue and more time investigating the problem. Plus, if an IT person has to leave the site, that means they have fuel costs and may even have to have a company car to get them to that site. So, of course, you save money there. The way it functions is actually really simple. It connects to the device via the TCP/IP network, so it follows the same protocols as most devices use when they connect. And in this case, the first device will initiate the TCP connection. Most devices are listening for a connection on the well-known port number 23, and a well-known port is a port that is designed for specific use and reserved for that use, and they are numbered 0 to 1024. After the communication is initiated, the devices connect using the three-way handshake. This consists of establishing contact and exchanging device information. See if I can say it this time. Synchronizing sequence numbers is the second step. Managed it. And then it exchanged the parameters that will control how the devices communicate. After the three-way handshake, the devices will maintain a connection as long as desired. So of course, when you're ready to get off, you'll have to manually disconnect. This TELNET is compatible with both full duplex and half duplex connections, and the terminals will typically negotiate this automatically. It can also be used for file transfer after it's connected. And another huge ability that it has is it allows for connections to multiple terminals at a time. So one unit can actually be downloading and transferring files to multiple different units at any given time, and it will identify each terminal by the IP address. Communication model is ridiculously simple. TELNET catches all input and output and transfers it to the device over the network. This allows it to behave as though you're working on that device. This also causes little issues with congestion because literally everything is sent or received for that matter. One use is as a virtual terminal, sort of. You can use it it allows the use of a remote server to fulfill the role, but you have very limited commands because you're using this text base. it will simply communicate with the remote server and translate the data for the local hardware. It's a very sketchy and rocky way of doing it, but you can use a remote terminal using Telnet. Next is configuration. The biggest use of Telnet is the remote configuration of a device, because most commands and configuration items can be accessed using text-based commands. This makes it incredibly helpful for accessing remote devices. Because it is text-based, it allows for quick access to remote device settings. However, today it's primarily used for configuring the routers and switches in a device that isn't too far away. And this is because the routers and switches do not have a terminal of their own, and the only way you can actually access them is to be remote configured. One example of this is PuTTY, again, for routers and switches. File transfer. Because it allows access to a remote device, it allows the local device to download or upload files as needed. The files must be downloaded in order to be viewed. Because Telnet does not allow remote viewing of graphics, and it is strictly text-based, there's no way to preview a file before it's downloaded. So you have to know what you want before you actually download. And of course, to download a file, you have to know the location on the remote device and the file name, obviously. Disadvantages. Because the remote device does not know what the local device is capable of, or vice versa, many advanced capabilities are disabled. This is because one of the devices may not actually be capable of the advanced features, and so it just kind of streamlines everything down to what's required. A big concern with Telnet is that it is not very secure at all. All data sent between devices is sent in plain text with no encryption. So anybody monitoring data going between these two devices can see every bit that's going through there. This has led to some improvements though. The Secure Shell protocol is quickly replacing Telnet. For this reason alone has actually been a huge push behind it. It can be difficult for beginners. Because it's strictly text-based, a user that's unfamiliar with the necessary commands will have difficulties using this. Until, of course, they get more comfortable or just give up and go for something else, I guess. Another disadvantage is the slow speed. Because Telnet is catching all input and output and sending it to the other device, it's sending every little bit and receiving every little bit. So that kind of slows things down. And it also means a lot of unnecessary data is going to be sent and received. Unfortunately, there are no pretty colors on this. It is black and white, strictly text-based, and it does not have the use for colors or graphics. And then finally, you're not able to use the mouse. Because it's text-based, the mouse just really is unnecessary for it. Using Telnet. The first step in using Telnet is to download a Telnet server program. Many devices are actually already capable of using Telnet. It just has to be enabled. The program allows a user to issue commands and have them read by the remote device. And without this program, the local device will not be able to send and receive all input or output. Now, once you have the software on the computer, or if it's already on there, you simply need to enable it and then connect to the remote device. The final step would actually be to disconnect the device and disable the Telnet program. This will keep your information secure. And of course, there should probably be a step in between reminding you to watch what you send over a Telnet connection. Network Virtual Terminal, or NVT. The NVT is actually an important part of how Telnet works. The NVT is an imaginary device that basically sits between the real terminals and kind of negotiates. Each host will map its terminal characteristics to the settings the NVT has and assume that all other devices are going to as well. Because all of them make an assumption based on the streamlined settings that we mentioned earlier, this allows effective and smooth communication between all connected devices. And of course, this establishes the minimum standards between them. Other uses. While researching it, I found a link to where you can watch the entire first or fourth episode of Star Wars, however you're counting. and it can be accessed by using TELNET. It's not important, but I just thought it was cool, and I can't not mention that because somebody actually did that, the whole thing apparently. I couldn't get it all the way because, had stuff to do, but really, the whole thing. And of course, there's a link on a way for you to do it on your computer as well. Apparently, it's not hard to find. Another use is bulletin boards. Strangely enough, there are actually bulletin boards that are still reported to be active. And of course, we're using the word active pretty loosely. Because of course, obviously there are bulletin boards, but the fact that there are TELNET bulletin boards that are still active is the crazy part. And a bulletin board is a computer server that allows computers to connect to the system. Users can then upload or download software or data, and messages can be uploaded in a number of ways, including the primary way of public message boards. Legacy. While TELNET's not widely used anymore, it has definitely impacted the way things are done with networking. Secure Shell wasn't directly inspired by TELNET. The biggest difference, of course, being the security upgrade. It does not send plain text, but instead it encrypts the data that it's sent. And of course, a lot of programs today allow an option. A lot of programs for accessing routers and switches actually have an option for using TELNET or Secure Shell, depending on which you'd like to use. And of course, here are my references. And here are my references, and forgot to put an end page, so end